I am a fan of both comics and manga. And while it might seem strange, comics, especially Marvel comics, have had a great influence on my writing as a fantasy web author. Which is why I have decided to start a new series in which I will be looking at the history of Marvel Comics from its foundation to the current year 2021. Now, remember the usual, guys. If you like the video and you want to see more like it, then please remember to subscribe and leave a like and a comment on your thoughts on this video and what else you'd like to see me do in future. And also, if you go to the description down below, you'll find the links to my book, my web novel, Phantom Ddraig, which is an action high fantasy sci-fi novel with action scenes that could come straight from a comic or a manga. So if you're interested, remember description below. Now, our look at Marvel's birth does not, in fact, begin with legendary figures like Stan Lee or Jack Kirby or Joe Simon, but rather with one Martin Goodman. Born Mo Goodman in 1908, his parents were from Lithuania, which then was part of the Russian Empire, and like many Jewish people during that era, they immigrated to the US to seek a better life. His father, Isaac, was a tailor, and his mother, Anna, raised him and his 14 siblings, amongst whom he was the ninth. When he was a child, he used to spend his time creating magazine mock-ups by cutting out their stories and articles he liked and pasting them together, showing that at a young age, Goodman had a knack for the magazine industry. Unfortunately, his life was not easy. His father's construction job ended with a back-breaking rooftop fall, and Isaac Goodman became a peddler. The Goodman family constantly moved around Brooklyn, trying to stay one step ahead of their landlords. Martin was forced to drop out of school in the fifth grade and worked a series of jobs that failed to excite the young man. Goodman soon left his home to ride the rails all over the United States before he started his career. He hopped trains, slept in hobo camps, and ate beans cooked over an open fire. This experience gave him an intricate knowledge of multiple cities in the United States, with his lawyer and his friend Jerry Perlis even stating he knew every town and it helped him to know the markets. His childhood love for magazines is what eventually brought him back to New York. He found work singing the praises of pulps as a publisher's representative for Eastern Distributing. Eastern still fell apart, but Goodman's fortune only rose. He and his co-worker, one Louis Subelti, joined forces to form Newsstand Publications, turning out westerns, detective stories, and romance tales at 15 cents an issue. Newsstand Publications went under, and Goodman's partner Lewis jumped the sinking ship. But Goodman convinced the printer that it stood to make back its money if it allowed him to continue publishing some of the titles. Goodman's cunning instincts quickly carried the company back into profitability within a couple of years. He moved into the considerably more elegant RKO building uptown. He'd devised a simple formula for success. If you get a title that catches on, then add a few more titles. He's once stated to have told someone. You are in for a nice profit. It was all about staying on top of the trends and not providing anything more than disposable literature. Fans, he's quoted to have said another time, are not interested in quality. Well, looks like modern Marvel might be following more of his business module after all these years than we all thought. Goodman must be proud. Goodman's main publishing strategy was to follow trends, like I stated before. He watched the other magazines on newsstands that were selling well, and he constantly talked to his fellow publishers to find out what they were up to. One of his favorite strategies was to play golf with fellow publishers or take his friends or rivals to lunch. He would pick their brains and listen to them boast about what they were achieving. Afterwards, he'd go straight back to his office and create a new magazine title based on that conversation. Whenever he caught wind of a bandwagon, he was lightning fast to jump on it. For example, when Goodman observed that the Lone Ranger was popular, he created a pulp magazine called The Masked Rider. When Tarzan was big, he published a title called Khazar the Great. To minimize his financial risks, Goodman often created new companies, at least on paper, to publish some of these titles. He was soon the owner of newsstand publications, Western Fiction, Red Circle, and Manvis, amongst others. This practice enabled him to keep his taxes low, and he could quickly shut down a company with failed titles or protect himself from potential lawsuits. A probably unintended result of all this was that for decades Goodman had not yet established a recognizable brand around him. So, yes, Marvel as we know it had not yet been awakened like the X gene in a very horny teen. In 1939, Goodman got a visit from a friend of his called Frank Torpy, a salesman for a company called Funnies Inc. Torpy pitched the idea that Goodman should branch out and publish a relatively new invention called a comic book. Now, comic books had been there before, but they became popular with the introduction of Superman in Action Comics number 1. The first comic book superhero was a huge hit, selling every copy of his 200,000 print run. Goodman decided to start another company and inventing a new title for the magazine. This company was called Timely Comics. And the title for Goodman's first comic book was Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics number 1 covered all popular bases with its 64 pages. Paul Gustavon's mustachioed saint-like angel, Ben Thompson's Jungle Adventure Kazar, Al Andre's Cowboy the Masked Rider, and gag comics and gag cartoons to fill it out. Goodman commissioned a cover from veteran pulp illustrator Frank R. Paul, and Timely's first comic book was published on August 31, 1939. Included in the packet Goodman received from Tropy were two stories about two superheroes, with the first one being Namor the Submariner, half human, half Atlantean, who possessed superhuman strength, could breathe underwater, and was able to fly, and the Human Torch, an android whose origin included his creation and eventual evolution into a crime fighter. Marvel Comic number 1 sold 80,000 copies in September 1939, and so Goodman went back to press. Eventually, it sold 800,000, better than the average DC comic title. In the years to come, Timely staffers would talk about seeing Frank Toppy darting in and out of Goodman's office, moving so fast that they thought he was a messenger. The truth was, he was just collecting $25, a weekly thank you from Martin Goodman for pulling him into the comic book industry. Just say what you want about Goodman, but he knew how to treat his friends. You can't say the same about his employees, though. Anyway, Goodman had stumbled onto a gold mine, though he changed the name from Marvel Comics to Marvel Mystery Comics because Goodman was as loyal to a name as Karen Mjolnir is to Thor. Jesus Christ, please keep Thor away from Jason Aaron. Anyway, Goodman was too good a business person to miss the potential within comic books. So he asked 26-year-old artist and writer Joe Simon to create new characters directly for Timely. Simon, a former newspaper cartoonist from Rochester, New York, was earning around $7 per page from Funnies Inc. Goodman would pay him 12 pages and still spend less than he paid to Jacket. Simon, always an astute businessman, took the money. So now that Simon was hired, he also brought in a fellow artist who had worked with before, one Jacob Kurtzberg, who came straight out of the Lower East Side slums. A member of the South Folk street gang, as a youth, he was no stranger to the rougher elements of his neighborhood. Kurtzberg found his escape in fantasy, in Shakespeare, in movie matins. The life-changing moment for him was the rainy day he saw a pulp magazine with an illustration of a foreign-looking, futuristic object on the cover, floating down the gutter. He picked up the copy of Wonder Stories and stood transfixed, staring at this thing called a rocket ship. Thoroughly inspired, Kurtzberg threw himself into drawing his own stories, carefully studying the comic strip artistry of Milton Caniff's Terry and the Pirates, Hal Fort's Tarzan, and Bill DeBeck's Barney Gogo. Barney Google. A short stint at the Pratt Institute ended after a week when his father lost his factory job, but Kurtzberg found an alternative path to his career dream. After joining the Boys Brotherhood Republic, a local civic club designed to rescue youths from the street, Kurtzberg began producing a mimeographed cartoon series for the organization's newsletter. Then he enrolled in industrial school, filling out auto mechanic classes with an afternoon art course. At the end of his teens, he was hired to draw for the Fletcher's Brothers animation studio. But the assembly line production of Popeye and Betty Boop reminded him too much of his father's factory job. Stints at various comic strip syndicates followed, and by the time he met Joe Simon at Fox, Kurtzberg was ready to create something of his own. On a Flash Gordon derivative book called Comet Pierce, Kurtzberg signed with a pseudonymous name that he would soon adopt permanently and legally, one Jack Kirby. Timely was soon cranking out more comic books. In 1940, they published more issues of Marvel Mystery Comics, which were 12 issues, plus Daring Mystery Comics, which were 6 issues, Mystic Comics, which were 4 issues, and as well as the Human Torch with 2 issues, and Red Raven Comics with 1 issue. As with the pulps, Goodman cared about 2 things: trends on the front end and sales figures on the back. He wanted the artists and the writers who worked for him to chase the trends and create a lot of content. If a new character or title sold, it stayed. If it didn't, he kicked it out. In Marvel Mystery Comics number 8 of June of 1940, the characters of Namor and the Human Torch appear together in the same story. Now, in our day and age of crossover galore, that might not seem like a big deal, but in the world of comic books at the time, it was. As a matter of comparison, Batman and Superman, the two star characters of DC Comics, would not appear together in the same story until 1952, basically 12 years later. In late 1940, Simon sketched out a variation of MLJ Comics' Star Spangled Hero, The Shield. Simon stated, "I stayed up all night sketching. Mailed armor, jersey, bulging arms and chest muscles, skin-hugging tights, gloves and boots flapping and folded beneath the knee. I drew a star on his chest, strips from the belt to a line below the star, and colored the costume red, white, and blue. I ordered the shield. At the time, bottom of the page, he wrote, Super American. Then reconsidered and changed the name to Captain America, making this hero distinct enough to be legally distinct, which I'm sure is the only kind of distinct that Goodman would have cared about. Simon sent Goodman a sketch of this new superhero. This character caught Goodman's attention right away. Based on his trend-watching instincts, he believed Captain America could be exciting enough to compete with Superman himself. Immediately, Goodman made an offer to buy the rights to the character, his standard practice. But this time, Simon and Kirby resisted. They wanted to negotiate. In the end, they accepted a royalty deal from Goodman, promising them 25% of profits owned from the use of the character, in addition to their regular page rate. As soon as the deal was made, Goodman gave the go ahead to create the new comic book title. This one would be called Captain America Comics, and it went into production. The comic showed up on newsstands on December 1940, though strangely for some reason it has March 1941 on the date. I have yet to find a reason why this is. Anyway, Captain America was a great success, with the first issue selling a near Superman number of 1 million copies, exceeding everyone's expectations. But this wasn't just the only exciting thing happening. In November, a skinny teenager was hired by Joe Simon as a temporary office worker for $8 a week. The kid had graduated from high school the previous spring and was looking for a long-term job. His parents, both Romanian immigrants, had struggled financially throughout the Great Depression, and the young man had been encouraged to work hard, skip a grade when possible, and graduate as early as he could so that he could find work to help support his family, which was a common occurrence at the time. The boy had dreams of being a writer, and for a time he worked part time at a newspaper writing obituaries about famous living people just in case they died. But he soon grew tired of writing about the living as if they were the dead. Luckily for him, his uncle, one Robbie Solomon, who worked at Timey, managed to secure him a meeting with Joe Simon, who hired him as an assistant. The kid quickly earned the trust of his boss, Joe Simon, who he helped in matters like proofreading, and it wasn't long before the kid, Lieber, got a chance to write something, a text only filler story called Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge. But the kid, Lieber, decided not to use his real name as a byline. Years later, he claimed that he was saving Stanley Lieber for when he published the great American novel. Instead, he used a name that he made up, and I mean, obviously, we already figured out who he is. It's Stanley. It's obviously Stanley. And that is where we end this installment on the history of Marvel and what I view as the true birth of the early golden age of Marvel Comics. I have plans to do more videos to go on the main golden age, the silver age, and the current and the dark age and the current age of Marvel Comics history of the company, but I'm basically going to stop here. And if you want to know more about Marvel history and where I got much of this information, these are the two books that I recommend you check out. The first is The Marvel Studio Story by Stefan and Charles Watts and Charles Wetzel, and two is Marvel Comics: The Untold Story by Shin Hao. By Shin Hao. Sorry. Anyway, this has been Red Chaos One signing off.